Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the second week of our steadiness series with Studio B. I'm Jennifer Siramboli, and I'm the founder of Studio B, if this is your first time joining. Today's practice is really going to go back to basics for mindfulness. So we'll start with the meditation, and then we'll work our way into some movement practices, passive movement practices, yin yoga, and work with the mind a bit today. Because I don't know about you, but certainly with all of the goings on right now, with all of with the news stream, with some worries that we all are having, which we should be having, it would be very normal. It's very normal to have concerns and worries about what's happening in the world. There's some rumination going on, that we're feeling a little yanked around by the mind really spinning out into worst case scenario, the mind jumping ahead into future worries, the mind perhaps getting really stuck in pulled back into the past, which of course isn't useful or helpful. So the practice today will be centered on just staying present, remaining in presence, so that we can notice when we're being pulled behind into the past or skipping ahead into the future, and just steadying things to come back to right now. So I'd like to invite each of you to find a comfortable seat. If you're tuning in from work today and you're in a chair, that's absolutely fine. If you're at home and you would prefer resting down, laying down, you could certainly go ahead and do that. If you're feeling a little sluggish, if your energy's low, I would recommend that you just go ahead and stand up. So either way, just paying attention to what would be most supportive right now for you in this moment. So we'll start with a short grounding meditation. Again, we'll be working on just some foundational practices to begin with, then move into some passive yin yoga, and then end with another meditation. So I'm just setting my timer, and we're going to start this first meditation for just 6 minutes. So go ahead and find your seat. If you're laying down and want to grab a blanket, that's always nice, especially since apparently we're getting some freezing cold weather here in the Northeast over the next couple days. So you might be noticing some of that air coming in today. I'm starting to notice it now. So just taking a moment and getting yourself set up. If you are in a chair at work, especially if that chair is on wheels, just make sure that you bring your hips just a little forward on the chair so you could really ground your feet. And then, of course, either standing up or laying down is another option. And once you find the perfect placement for you right now, you could go ahead and close your eyes, or you could just simply bring your gaze forward and rest it down. And before I ring the bell, I'd like each of you to just take 3 full deep breaths, just full deep breaths, pulling the air in through the nose or mouth and emptying the air, the breath, completely out. And 2 more, inhale and exhale, really let go. You could even sigh. And 1 more, big breath in And big breath out. Just empty the breath out. And then let's just take a few shoulder rolls up, back, and down. So just up, back, and down. And maybe one more. Up, back, and down. And then just settle into the stillness of your chosen shape. And in just a moment, you'll hear 3 bells coming into view. And just really tracking that sound until it completely dissolves. And just come in to the body, bringing your attention in to how the body is right now. You could notice or note the shape of your body. Notice where your body is touching the ground. Whether you're sitting or standing or laying down, just noticing the weightedness there. How you can bring your attention down into the spaces that are touching or landing. There's a groundedness here. And just acknowledging this earthy quality of support. And noticing the breath, how the breath is, how the breath is moving through the system. Notice if there's ease right now in the breath, or if the breath feels a little labored. Just notice how the breath is, the quality of breathing. And of course, working with the natural breath, just as it is. So there's no need to change whatever you're finding. And really noticing how the body is breathing. So notice this interdependence between the body and the breath. You might also notice that there's a particular area of the body breathing that you feel most connected to. And notice how it feels to just rest your attention there in this anchor. this primary space of attention. And notice if you feel pulled away in the senses, perhaps a sound rising up. And see if you could gently return back to that anchor. In just a moment, we'll hear again the sounds of the bell coming into view, bringing us back into full presence and attention in this very moment together. Again, just tracking these sounds until they completely dissolve. And you may have heard the sounds of my dogs barking, the sounds of life happening, which life is always happening. There's always sounds around us, and there's always distractions, and we can never quite find this perfect space for meditation, for quiet, for these contemplative practices. I'm reminded of this story, and it's a story that a teacher I recently worked with actually, his name is Joseph Goldstein, and he is one of the founders of the Insight Meditation Society, which is located up in Barre, Massachusetts. And he often tells the story, and I might get some details wrong, but you'll get you'll understand where I'm going with this in just a moment. But he, I guess, was getting out of a really busy phase of his life and teaching, and really was longing for retreat. And he ended up going to India for a long-term retreat. And he booked in this beautiful retreat center, and he was really, just longing for this time in quiet, uninterrupted, and, just kind of was manifesting how everything would unfold. And he gets all the way to India, and he checks into his beautiful retreat center, and he sits for his first meditation, and there's construction going on right below him, and it's constant banging and hammering, and people and lots of noise, and here he is right in the midst of it. So and it's just such a wonderful example of things, because we just, we could plan, we could plan for things to for any situation to unfold in this really desirable way, and when we run into the actual experience, it could turn out very, very differently. And right now is a great example of that. Here we are. I certainly wasn't planning on a pandemic in 2020. We were certainly not planning on things unfolding as they did, yet here we are. And this is what we are being asked to work with. So, these perfect conditions that we desire are not real. They're these projections of the mind and really, imaginings, creative imaginings and longings and wantings for things to turn out in specific ways. And of course, there are times in our lives when we're planning and putting this effort out there in a way, and it unfolds beautifully. And we've had those experiences too. But when things don't unfold as we expected, and we get, if there's a lot of attachment there could be a lot of suffering, a tremendous amount of suffering, because we feel really stuck in things unfolding differently. So what I'd like to do right now is I'd like to invite each of you to go into a shape. So I have this great wall behind me, and many of you may not know this, but I've been a yoga teacher for the last 13 years, 12 years, 13 years. And I love teaching yoga, movement practices. I love incorporating yoga into, I love feeling yoga in my body. I use yoga throughout most every day. It's very rare though that I practice on my yoga mat for more than a few minutes at a time. So my practice might look like 10 to 20 minutes of practice in the morning, and then coming back to it in the afternoon to stretch out my low back or my hips just from sitting at the computer all day. And then perhaps, one or two restorative shapes before I go to bed, or kind of interweaving that into my meditation practice. But it certainly doesn't look like going to my mat and kind of pushing my body physically for an hour and a half. It just doesn't look like that anymore. And I of course still love taking movement classes and participating in some of the classes in the offerings on Studio B's offerings, Rachel's classes especially I love. But so I try to keep it in my body. But my regular daily practice consists of practices just like we're about to do today. So I hope that takes some pressure off of you. So you don't have to be this really, what's the word I'm looking for? Hyper vigilant practitioner of yoga, right? A good example is this. I used to run a lot, and I never considered myself a runner because I was not very good at it ever. I just didn't have the stamina or the body type for it to come naturally. So it was a lot of effort that was put into the running. So I would talk about running and people were like, oh, I didn't know you were a runner. I would say, oh, I'm not a runner. I just do this to stay in shape or to lose the baby weight or whatever. And I remember the first time I was doing half marathons, and after one of those long races, I took my shoes off and my toes were bleeding because, from the running, from my shoes, whatever. And I started crying, and I said to myself, well, I'm a real runner now. Right. So that's kind of what it's a good illustration to this striving effort that we put forward in these activities that should really spark some joy and equanimity and interest and curiosity. And instead we get really attached to the outcome. We get really attached to the title of being a runner, being a yoga practitioner. If you're here with me, you're a meditator, you're a yoga, you're practicing meditation, you're practicing yoga, you're already here, in other words. So we don't have to have these grand expectations or play into like this idea of what we should look like or feel like in these practices. You're here, you're with me, we're together, right? We're participating, we're trying. So the first shape, and especially if you are at work, if you're tuning in from at work and you're not able to get into a shape right now, you could just sit and I'll give you an alternative. So for now, I'm going to ask each of you, so if you have a bolster, and this is just a bolster, and sometimes they're more cylindrical, like the one that Jen O'Sullivan had the other day, you could use the bolster. If you don't have a bolster, you could just use a folded up towel. This is just a bath towel. Beach towels do tend to work a little better, although these towels I have are pretty thick and sturdy, so they work good too. So if you have a yoga blanket, you could use a yoga blanket, and you could place that towel or the bolster against the wall, and it'll just give you a little back bend because we're going to put our legs up the wall. Now, of course, if you don't want the extra back bend, you could just lay flat against the mat. So I have a yoga mat here set up, and I have the bolster against the wall. And I'm just gonna get really close to the wall and sit down on the bolster, and then I'll bring my legs right up the wall. So I'm just adjusting here, and the legs are going up, and you could kind of scoot your body forward in towards the wall. And you could either bring your arms out, or you could bring your hands on your belly. Whenever you bring your hands in this low belly space, the hara, it'll provide a little more grounding. So I tend to do that a lot. I like to just bring my hands to the belly and bring my attention down into this grounding energy. So once you're settled here, I'm going to go ahead and adjust, but you stay there. So I'm going to come out of that shape so I could talk to all of you. But if you're in legs up the wall, just go ahead and stay there. And we're going to be there about 5 minutes. So just close your eyes and feel your body in this shape. And just really notice how the body is. So feeling into the experience of this shape. Noticing your breath. And noticing how the breath is right now. Notice how the breath is moving through the body. Notice if there's any restriction or effort in breathing. And see if you could just relax. And now for the next minute, so for the next 60 seconds, I'm going to invite you to look at the mind thinking. So consciousness itself, looking at the mind. So you can imagine just turning your awareness towards the mind. This mind that thinks and creates and learns and imagines and problem solves. Think about all the different qualities of the mind that are so important to having this human experience. And imagine that you can just focus your attention there. And for the next minute, for the next 30 seconds, I would like you to just count every thought that comes into this field of view, this field of looking. So I'm going to set the timer, and you won't hear a bell, and you can begin for just 1 minute. And you could end. So, what you might have noticed is that there were many thoughts. You may have counted a lot. You may have only counted one persistent thought. So a thought that just kind of kept coming up, the same thought, or perhaps that one thought overwhelmed the entire minute. In other words, you may have also had a really spacious experience where you only had a few thoughts surface or potentially no thoughts. In other words, there's no right answer here. Every time you go into this space of curiosity to look, this looking in, whether we're looking in at the body, whether we're looking in at the breath, which we've been doing a lot of, whether we're looking in at the heart, whether we're looking in at the mind, thinking, we'll notice. And that is the idea. The idea is to notice that there's noticing happening. So in other words, it brings us into a lot of curiosity about who is actually looking or what is actually looking. And this could be a lot to think about at first, but I'd like you to name it perhaps consciousness or awareness. Some people feel most comfortable calling it soul, whatever it is, spirit, whatever and it is or how you name it, we could create just enough space to notice that the mind thinks, that the job of the mind is to think and remember and learn and problem solve, all of the things that I mentioned. And the mind is always trying to make sense of the world around us. It's trying to make sure that we are safe in this world. So it's just a natural human capacity of the mind to want to be in control of the environment, of our situation, of planning ahead. And once we start thinking about these qualities of the mind and understanding how the mind works, we could create just enough space so that when the mind's really caught up in a cycle that's not serving us, a cycle that might be causing more anxiety, a cycle of regret perhaps on a decision or a conversation or interaction that could have happened many years ago, and we begin ruminating or just hovering in this regret or depression of things that we can't possibly change. Whenever we catch ourselves in these cycles that are not skillful, if we have enough practice working with this spaciousness of just looking, we're able to interrupt that spinning out and just calm things down. So just kind of noticing how that's landing for you in this quiet space, this experience of looking at the mind, thinking. Now we'll be moving out of the shape by simply guiding the knees down towards the belly. And if you have a bolster underneath you or a blanket underneath you, you could roll to one side and just move that bolster or blanket out and then come back. So you're in folded pose, extending on your back with your knees tucked in towards your belly and your arms wrapped around the tops of the shins. And you could reach for opposite hands to opposite elbows here. But if that pulls the shoulders up and away from the floor and creates a lot of tension in the neck, just loosen that grip a little and relax. Folded pose is very restorative for the low back. It gives a little stretch through the glutes and hamstrings and releases the lumbar spine with a lot of support. So for those of you that really love the qualities of child's pose, but it's too much on your knees or ankles, this is a great alternative. And it's a wonderful shape just in and of itself. So let's just drop into some quiet space. And then we'll try another practice of looking into these qualities of the mind. So getting to know your own mind and some of the patterns there, some of the ways in which the mind operates. And there's no judgment or criticism. There's no right or wrong. Just looking, getting curious, taking interest. Taking a moment here. And now looking in and getting really curious about how the thoughts are being pulled in. So are you bringing in picture thoughts? Or is your mind processing word thoughts? How are thoughts coming in? How do you see them? I'm just looking in and getting curious. There might be a combination of both or neither. So also acknowledge that. Now notice any themes. Are there regular themes that are coming in? Themes of planning ahead. I'm a big planner, so I have a lot of planning thoughts. Are there themes from the past? Are there themes of presence, of right now? Is there a lot of repetition or imagining? Just getting to know the mind, befriending the mind, getting curious. And you could just kind of come into a half smile. You could imagine taking a little bow or just gratitude for this mind and all of its capacities. Gratitude for all the times that you've really counted on these capacities without even realizing. The magnificent mind, thinking and learning and sorting and trying to understand life. And the more we come in to work with and get to know these qualities and features and capacities of the mind, the more we can recognize when we're getting really caught up in unskillful thought patterns that are just pulling us away from present moment awareness. And we could kind of catch it, just like we catch these distractions that come in through the sense doors, just like we could catch unskillful speech, right? Just interrupting these reactive patterns and pausing with it. Oh, that's the mind remembering, the mind regretting, the mind worrying, the mind planning. These qualities of the mind. And we could just imagine taking this bow of gratitude and coming back to full presence. So right now that full presence is in the body, in this shape, in this breath, right here. Just taking a few more full breaths. You could even deepen the breaths if that feels supportive. Before going back into your day, just these 3 short practices, about 5 or 6 minutes in meditation. We spent 6 minutes today. About 6 minutes in legs up the wall. And we've been here about 6 minutes in folded pose. So just kind of interrupting, looking, getting really curious, and then being very nurturing to what we're finding. So, yes, this too. So I'd like to invite each of you to release out of this shape by coming to the side. You can extend on your yoga mat and take a quiet shavasana on your own. Or you could just simply come out of the shape. All of these yin yoga, passive or restorative shapes are almost like a little mini shavasana. There's relaxing and restorative qualities here. And really, this shavasana time is just for you if you choose it. Thank you for joining me today. I'm so grateful for each of you. And I look forward to seeing you next Thursday for our third week of steadiness. Have a great afternoon.